All right. Happy Tuesday. Trying to recover from the Renfest over the weekend. It was a good time. It was a good time. I thought, as I'm kind of continuing this campaign starter series thing, to delve into factions, mostly because that's kind of what I've been thinking about recently. So I'm on the same whiteboard actually as I was. If you zoom out, you can see everything. But I kind of wanted to make a side section. Hey, Ian. A side section and where we could delve into factions a little bit more. We talked about in the other campaign starter streams, start with two factions. Party is its own faction, but with two that we create, and on the party, you get that triangle, three factions, little triangle, which I think is good for interaction. Factions should be opposed to each other. That's good. And then we looked at Mouse Ritter through this screenshot, which is attached here. Get a good name, a name that's flavorful is better really for you or whoever the GM is, because just to get your imagination flowing. It's put you in the mindset. So the ones from Mouse Ritter, I think, do a good job of this without really adding much. It's just Cat Lord, but just Cat and Lord put them together, and I already have images in my brain of aristocrats running around uh, doing terrible things. And Noble Mouse, Rat Bandits, Fairy Queen. Of course, you want to come up with things that work for you. Whatever will get you fired up, but probably help be also a little bit of a memory trick. Help you get. Oh yeah, this is the thing. This is the thing in the place. Great. They should have some kind of resources, and then they should have some goals. Now, Mouse Ritter uses a very clever system. You're rolling dice to see between sessions to see what factions are doing, what they're accomplishing. They get some bonuses to the dice, I think, with if they can, whichever resources they apply, add bonuses what they're rolling for. As they are completing goals, they'll fill in the circles. Once they've filled in all the circles, they completed the goal, they will gain an additional resource, and then presumably you fill in another goal. Pretty snazzy. And then they mention there's not a mechanic for it, but I think that's fine because you're really just gonna have to kind of play with it and see how things go. That if the party were to impact their goals through their adventures, right? That they might undo progress or maybe even eliminate a resource. So, for example, with the Cat Lord, one of the resources is hired mercenaries and bandits. If the party were to take down a Cat Lord, maybe the Cat Lord themselves escapes, or maybe they weren't there, but their hench animals were defeated, then you might say, oh, their mercenaries and bandits are off the board. And basically, the factions themselves are pretty much as strong as the amount of resources they have, and I guess a little bit of what those resources are. Basically, they're as strong as their resources. So the stronger factions, they gain more resources. If they happen to lose resources, they will, they will degrade. And I would imagine that if you are able to eliminate all their resources and they don't fulfill any goals, then they are eliminated as a force. So if you shave the cat or do something so the cat makes the cat's presence less terrifying or no longer terrifying, maybe they become comical. You get rid of all their hired mercenaries and bandits and you drain their wealth, then yeah, the Cat Lord maybe still a lord in name, but they are no longer an adversary. Their faction card is taken. So I think it's a really neat system. Now, on the side here, you'll see one that I mocked up. And I shared this on the Discord. I also shared it to patrons because I got to share something with patrons. Where I just kind of made up one. This has no basis in any kind of game, but I was just thinking about it. So what I really like the simplicity that the Mouse Ritter ones have. But I kind of want a little bit more. I want a little bit. I think maybe I was thinking, well, maybe I want to decouple resources from their power level. I'm still going back and forth. Not exactly sure. Frederick says you start with God, religion, and then move to magic colleges, small schools, then thieves guilds and thief lords, finally emperors, kings, lords, and merc guilds. Wow, well that's a lot, Frederick. And I don't think that's a bad list at all, but I think that's way too much for a campaign starter. I mean, if you do all that for your start of campaign, I mean that's amazing. And probably if you have a world that you've been working on for a while and you tend to put everything in that world, then a lot of that stuff you've already done that work previously. I think that's asking a lot for a new person or a new game. I think it's great to have a lot of that stuff eventually, but I would think for the beginning, just pick two. If you have in your mind that initially, or sorry, that in the end you will have all those things. You're going to have magic colleges. You're going to have some other kind of esoteric schools. You're going to have guilds, and then you're going to have independent, I guess, lords like thief lords, and then you're going to have your political stuff. I think that's a great end goal to have. But I think when you're starting, it's a tall order. I mean, hey, if you can manage it, more power to you. But I don't think I would ask somebody like, yes, to start, because in any how many of those, so if you imagine in an adventure, and I would say particularly a starting adventure and probably a low level adventure, how many of those factions are you reasonably going to interact with? So maybe all those exist in wherever, but you're in the keep on the Borderlands. So how many factions are in the keep? There's, I guess, the evil chaos faction. There's the law and order. The what do they call them? The Castellan, and maybe there's a third one. Maybe there's, I don't know if there's a thief guild, the thief presence, some kind of underworld sort of presence there might be. So you really have two or three. And by factions, I don't just mean, obviously any individual can be their own faction, but I really mean, how did I define it? I defined it pretty well somewhere, I thought. Basically, someone's trying to increase their power by actively shaping the world to increase their power, basically, their significance. So the blacksmith who's just trying to make good tools or swords or blades isn't a faction, because they're not trying to change the world, alter the world to raise their power level. They're just doing. They may be the best blacksmith in the universe, but they're not trying to do that. They're not. That would not be a faction. So we got a guy. So in my case, I came up one. Okay, it's a Baron. Clodamar the fourth. I gave him 3 hit dice. Now I'm trying to, in my own materials, I'm trying to do everything. So everything would come from hit dice, which I gave different terms to. I think I want to use HD because I just think it's very simple and it's a nice, very basic look at how strong something is. In this case, I think I call it hegemony dice, so I get HD out of it. 3. And then I gave him 3 resources. Now using the Mouse Ritter model, 3, their power is equal to their resources, which might work. I'm still debating it. Might work. So they have their goals. I think increase their estate, raise their treasury, and gain prestige. Good goals. I totally just put random boxes in there, 3 and 4. I'm not sure what the logic is. If we go down and we look at the boxes here for Mouse Ritter, there is probably some logic as to which ones to. So it usually looks like the goal with the least amount of progress that you need is 2. So you need at least 2 progress to fulfill any goal, at least with these. And there are a few more. I don't know if there's anything vastly different in those. Let me just take a sip of water for the working man. So some of them have 2. Kidnap mice only has 2. Dominate a trade route has 2. Raise tax revenue has 2. If you want to say, okay, for the fairy queen kidnapping some mice, you can look at it and say that's kind of an easier task. So I might say, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like, hey, look, for the fairy queen to kidnap some mice, that's easy. For these rat bandits to dominate a trade route, that doesn't sound easy. But I don't know how long a trade route we're talking about. Maybe a short one, but that doesn't seem like it would be the easiest thing to do. Dominate an entire trade route seems more difficult, actually. But they put that as 2. And the rat bandits are not they only have 2 resources, so they're not as strong as the cat lord. They're the weakest in terms of resources. They're the weakest of the bunch. So I don't know where they got those numbers from. I don't have the context that they do. So I don't know what a trade route is. Is a trade route, is that just a hex, a route that goes from a settlement in one hex to the settlement in the next hex? Yeah, I could see. I don't know what dominate means. You control it, sure. Establish a protection racket actually seems easier to me, but it has more steps. And then capturing a fortress, yeah, I get how that has more steps. I might even give it more steps than that, considering that, let's see, lead a settlement into the Feylands comes 1, 2, 3 is 5. So is establish a new settlement. 1, 2, 3. So is subjugate a settlement. I'm not sure how how as capturing a fortress is less resources than subjugating a settlement or less intense. So I'm not sure. Hey, Bruno. Okay, Bruno's asking about the boxes. So the boxes is how many, and this is Mouse Ritter in here, and mine up here. It's the idea is going to be about the same, more or less. In between sessions, you would roll some dice, and if they succeeded, or I think you would pick, maybe you would pick they work on one goal. I don't think it's for every goal. I think that you maybe you pick a goal. Maybe I should pull out. Let me see if I can find the Mouse Ritter. Hold on a minute. Let me see if I have the Mouse Ritter handy, so I can tell you. I do have it. Okay. Oh, look at it, right to the page. All right, so let's let's see. It's Dungeon Master Masterclass says the goals in your examples all seem instrumental, not intrinsic. No, they don't have. This is. I took a page exactly from out of Master. There's no particular end goal. So I get what you're saying. That, oh yeah, we're going to capture the settlement to do this. We're going to no. There's no ultimate goals written for them. So the way it works in Mouse Ritter is between sessions, each faction will work towards their current goal. Roll a d6 that adjusts for value for each relevant resource they have. They add 1 to the result. On a result of 4 or 5, you mark progress. On a 6+, you mark 2 progresses. When they complete a goal, add a new resource. And then you can update your map, because it's a hex. They're using a hex map sort of thing, so you can update these areas. Oh yeah, they now control these. So there's we can create goals for them, an actual final end goal. What do they want at the end of all things? That sort of a desire, or I don't know if desire. I don't know what. But we're not given that here. Frederick says they think a trade route is at least 3 hexes. Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's no way of knowing. It's by design. I think it's left open to you, and you can take that scale however you want it. You're doing small scale, small, big scale, big. It's just interesting because the Rat Bandits, their goals have different values, but they're also not as strong. So I don't know. You should. Mouse Ritter, you can get the rules free on itch. I don't know about drive-through, but on itch you can download them free. So there's kind of no reason not to take a look at them. And they have some very clever things. Now, part of the reason for me wanting to get a little more detailed. So I'm kind of look at their example. I'm like, yeah, I like that. I like the resources. I like the goals. I think I would like some kind, I didn't put in here some kind of more overwhelming goal, like they want to be whatever. But at the same time, I also think that these things can be changing, right? I think these are meant to be dynamic. So I think while it's nice to say the noble mouse wants world domination over all else, sure, but there's a lot of practical things that are going to be getting in their way. And maybe you say, okay, if the noble mouse can have its way, it wants to be king of the world, but it's probably not going to get there. But in the interim, these things, and then because these are going to be changing, they're a lot more fluid and flexible than if it were take over the world at all costs. Like now, we're looking at because these are all practical things. Oh, Ian doing good work. Thanks, Ian. I'll show this on the screen. Though my logo kind of mucked that up a little bit. It is in the chat. These are all what I like about the goals. They're all very practical things. So when you get the noble mouse in your game, for example, these goals are things that are going to be, they're not too esoteric. If the noble mouse's goal is take over the world, and I got to come up with steps for it, that's a lot of steps. That's a lot of stuff. Raise tax revenue may have some steps. Acquiring new land rights may also have some stuff, but they're a lot more close to the ground, which is more like what your players are going to see, especially at the beginnings when they're close to the ground. When they're at the higher echelons of power, then they'll see more things and have more information of different levels. But I think that's actually good. It is nice to have a direction for them when you need to think about as you're adding new goals. Well, gee, what does the Baron want, or what does the noble mouse want? Might be good to have that. But at the same time, I think the other thing I would be looking at as well, what has happened in the game? What does the Baron want now? Like, okay, so the Baron gained, okay, so in my case, yeah, the Baron gained a bunch of estate. Okay, so what's next? Like, what is next on their hit list? But it encourages me, I think, to think practically. What's next? And yes, if they say like, well, ultimately Baron Clodamar wants to be Empire of the World, that's great. Probably not going to happen unless they would do a billions of these things. But okay, so what's next on that? But it might also be like, damn, the players just did something. The players just did something. Okay, I want to respond to what the party just did. So I'm going to stick my nose maybe where the party doesn't want it to be and look at this new mine that they cleared out or something like that. So I do. So like I said, I like what Mouse Winner has. For myself, I like to play around with numbers and things. So I like having numbers. They're great for rolling dice and doing things. So I added a value, so this value can increase the more they are. Granted, I could just count resources here and say, oh no, right, 3. But I'm not sure. Part of my thinking was, do I want to decouple the resources from the power? Because what if you have I don't know. I'm trying to think. Maybe it doesn't even make sense. What do you think? Like, okay, I've got a really good mercenary company. I've got the Band of the Hawk. They get more powerful. Do their resources increase? And I guess I'm not a big. I like Berserk a lot, but I'm not an expert on Berserk lore. But during that arc where the Band of the Hawk, I guess they do, because they gain more authority and they gain noble. At one point, they gain noble titles and they gain this or that. So they gain new positions in the military, which aid them somewhat. I mean, really, in terms of the story, those things basically don't aid them at all. They gain those things, but they never actually, when they're out deploying them, at least in the battles, that it doesn't matter. But it does in terms of, oh, what's his name? The leader, um, shoot, Griffin. It does aid Griffin in Griffin's goal of wants to be basically king. They probably are. So, but it might, but the other thing I was thinking about too is, do I want to give these numbers? Do I want to give the resources numbers and say, oh, hey, you got 3, you can give them kind of 3, 2, 1. What is your major resource? And then kind of what is your minor and what is your little one? So, oh, 3, 2, 1 kind of thing. And if you use your noble standing, you get 3. If you lose local authority, you get 2. And if you use your political schemer, that's 1. Or maybe it'd be 3, 2, 1, kind of like that. So I like playing with some numbers a little bit. And I thought about also that your goals, maybe the goals, as you're getting goals, they should have at least as many squares as you have, so that I don't know, you should be aiming for things that aren't easy as your goals, but maybe that's wrong too. Because part of like with Mouse Ridders, they're as far as I know, they never give you any information on how to create your own faction. They give you a bunch of factions that are thematic to Mouse Ritter and say go. And obviously you could take them and do whatever you want with it. But to me, I'm trying to think about I'm trying to present potentially a tool or some kind of mechanic. Say, hey, you need some factions. Here's how to do. So I've been wondering if how the goals and the number of squares you should fill in, how they should equate to your power level. I did also come up with basically this personnel. I'm calling it the faction membership pyramid, which I created over here to tell you all this personnel info. And I don't know the best way to really write it out, but essentially you get a D6 level 0 kind of mook types for each of your HD hegemony dice. So for the Baron, he gets 3, so he's going to get 3d6. He calls them footmen. I call them footmen for him. 3d6 henchmen. These are just your level O guys. And then if you have 1 hit die, you'll have 1 level 1 member, and then if you're above level 1, you'll basically keep going until you have 1. You start at the top. You can say at your hit die level or hegemony die, your HD level, you have 1 member. And then you subtract your HD by 1 if you're above 1. And then you say, okay, if that whatever many left, that's how many HD minus 1. And you kind of go down, right? So the Baron has 1 level 3 fighter, which is probably himself, 2 level 2 members, who I just said, 1 level 2 cleric, 1 level 2 magic user, 3 level 1 fighters, and then 3d6 footmen. Do you need this? If you're just doing kind of a very abstracted faction like Mouser is doing, no, you don't. because you can just roll up some stuff, whatever. But part of my thinking is that you're not going to be just using these factions more or less abstractly. That this faction, one of two, let's say, is going to be the factions that you're going to be facing your antagonist or your party's opponent in whatever this first. Remember, we're trying to do a starter campaign. So you're kind of setting up an initial adventure. And that initial adventure, you're probably going to have, I was suggesting having two factions plus the party. One faction that's basically being the, say the, what we call it, the, maybe the party that hired, the faction that hires the party, or they're the benefactors of the party. They're the sponsor, kind of the party sponsor. And then another faction who is antagonistic. Obviously, you could have them both be antagonistic. You could have whatever, but probably going to have one that the party ends up going against, maybe going against two. Might be a little much for them, but hey, that's up to them. But, essentially just thinking about if you could kind of trying to sort of set up your scenario. Keep on the Borderlands. The Castellan is one faction. If you get against the Castellan, that's fine. Some folks have done that. You get against the monsters, that's fine. You probably don't want to have both the Castellan and the monsters against you. So you probably want to be pro one and anti the other. Hey, Jason, just working on some faction stuff for faction, I guess, rules or guidelines. That's guidelines sounds horrible. Guidance, maybe, for starting a campaign. We're not making it specifically a hex crawl, but we will get to hexy stuff. Probably not today, but in terms of the starter adventure, there's definitely some hexy stuff to come and to go. But today we're on factions. So the personnel, to me, is a helpful thing about looking at who's going to be in the field, who's going to be out there. I don't know about these numbers yet, because some of these numbers, and there's two things where it can get kind of complicated. Let me put hold on a minute. Let me get a square here. A couple things that could be complicated here. I'm just going to put another faction. Hey, awesome, Jason. Well, kudos on starting your own hex crawl. I have a, dare I say, crap ton of hex crawl, hex map kind of streams in the back catalog. But yeah, I mean, I hopefully this will be useful to you at some point. But if not, hang in there, because the hex portion of the program, like I said, or of this series, I guess it is a series, will come. So we have the faction. And I was thinking, if you look at something like Keep on the Borderlands, I'm pretty sure there are way more monsters, way more members. If we had if the kind of elemental chaos or something were the faction, it would have a ton. But the other thing I was thinking of is you could have kind of your sub factions. But this is where I think maybe am I getting too complicated? Is it getting too complicated? There's probably different ways to handle it. Bruno says, rolling to see progress after each session could be an issue. Isn't it better if we do it after X turns in game days? A whole session can be very short in game time. It can. I think the reason why they're saying in session, so there are a couple things. If you go back to the white box, happen to have Underworld and the Wilderness Adventures in front of me. I believe that they say something about it that basically in OD&D, I want to say that it's assumed that your dungeon, basically you'd make a foray into the dungeon, that it takes about a week of time. I'm trying to see if I can find it, but I might not be able to off the top of my head. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where it is. So the idea being, now remember, of course, there are two things to know. Two things to know about a delve in kind of OD&D terms. And I'm not saying this is necessarily where Mouse Ritter got it from. But of course, you were meant to, that a dungeon foray would be into the dungeon and then back to town at the end of the adventure. It was essentially what we would call now the West Marches approach. You start in a spot. No, I don't think there is. You start in a spot. You go to a dungeon, and oftentimes the dungeons are really, really close. At least the initial ones were kind of right there, so you didn't have to go too far. Do stuff in the dungeon, come out, end up back in town, rinse and repeat. And each one of those would take a week. I think it was a week. And this does, now it might seem very gamey, but it does a few things. It spaces you out so that if you're playing in these kind of big groups, that sort of West Marches style, that kind of big gaming club style, that you weren't stepping on everybody's toes. It kind of enforced a commitment to the dungeon expedition, to that particular expedition, because you know that if you're due and that's a week, you can't come back the next day real time and be like, oh, we're going to try it all over again. It's like, nope, that guy's still like that character's out. You're going to have to use somebody else. The other thing is, I think, from what is probably even the more likely explanation, as I've said all that, after I've said all that, is that, you know what, some sessions are going to be short, some sessions are going to be long. And so instead of trying to figure out the days part, which can be confusing, it's the same reason, like, right, we say, like, okay, every turn of the dungeon's 10 minutes. Some things are going to be really short. Some things you could argue are longer. But the reason why you do it every turn is because you just get that nice, it's like you just get a nice flow of, okay, the mechanic, roll. If you just do it after every session, it's that same sort of thing. You just get into that habit. Okay, roll. Every session, boom. And then the session, boom. At the end of the session, boom. Or even you could do it at the beginning of the session, boom. And it's done. And if some sessions are shorter than that, then hey, the factions are lucky if they roll well. If some sessions run longer, we're not going to worry about that. So if you have a session that's a downtime and takes several weeks, they're just getting one roll. If you have a session that takes 5 minutes because of whatever, well, they're going to get a roll. So oops. So I don't. Yes, it's maybe a little bit gamey to say session as opposed to X amount of time. But I think really what they just want it to be is they're just trying to be simple. Because it's easier to do sessions, I think, for most people than to say, hey, mark down all the stuff of game time. So I think they would say probably that, yeah, you could do it that way, but juice might not be worth the squeeze, right? Maybe it's more tracking than you want to do. I don't know how much, again, right, you have to remember the context of Mouse Ritter as a game. Are they trying to do the days and stuff? Does it really matter? If it's a game where you're tracking lots of days for different things, then it might make sense. Like, okay, a week, I'm going to do it, a week, whatever. But if you're not really tracking that much and really just track kind of session or season, something like that, then maybe a different method makes sense. So they chose a session. And that, like I said, I think it all comes out in the wash. I think it's fine. There are many times where you spend multiple days in a session, and then, yeah, some sessions will be really short, and some sessions will be longer, and, whatever the average is, the average is. So I think it's okay, but, it's almost just a suggestion, right? So just, you can turn it if you really like this Mouse Ritter faction business, but you don't want to use sessions as the gear that turns it, then yeah, change it to whatever works for you. Okay, so what I was thinking about here, again, I don't know if these numbers all work. I kind of like the idea of the leveled ones being sort of limited. Maybe you have to add more henchmen at the bottom. Maybe it's got to be, I don't know, HD times 10, 10d6 times HD. I don't know. So you get something like, well, so then you get like 60 times 6. that might be too much. I'm not sure how many to do. I'm also thinking in some ways that the whatever monster thing and the faction aren't the same. Maybe if it's, I don't know, because I'd like, part of me wants to go like, hey, I want to be as universal and generic as possible. And the other part of me is thinking, if I make something, do I have to make a whole bunch of exceptions to what it is? Maybe I have to come up with different types, right? Because there are different types here. It's here. The interesting thing with Mouse Ritter, and it probably works fine for them. I don't know if this will work fine for everything. As you can see here, it's insinuating you get a little bit of a power structure. I imagine the Fairy Queen is more powerful than the Cat Lord, who is more in turn more powerful than the Noble Mouse, who's in turn more powerful than the Rat Bandits. But you don't get any of that from any of these blocks. How powerful the Fairy Queen is totally separate from the Fairy Queen in this faction write-up. Right. I think what I'm trying to model a little bit more is, well, how powerful are these? And maybe I need some different scales or something. Maybe I should write that in here. Faction scales. Maybe we need some faction scales. John says you could propagate the pyramid. Top person is 1d6. Yeah, right. So he's saying basically that each one of these. That's kind of what I have that in mind. What they call this in as I've been reading about medieval, especially early medieval armies and just the way the feudal system was set up. They call it a retinue of retinues. So that you are a duke. You have your retinue, which is made up of, say, the counts and viscounts. Let's say the counts beneath you. Let's say you got a handful of counts. So you call to arms, beep, 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 right? And okay, and your counts answer the call. Let's say you've got 3 counts. I don't know how many counties a duchy generally has, but let's just say 3. Then those counts will, before they roll up, they're also touting their horns for their call to arms, beep, 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 beep. And then couple of viscounts will roll in, and each one's touting their horns, and they're getting a couple of just the lower, I guess, barons are coming, and then beneath them, maybe some of the landless, I forget what they call it, kind of landless knights are rolling in. So you're building this army out of this pyramid. Where each person, the person at the top is the king or whoever's the ultimate authority who's calling out to them, is calling out, and that's kind of where I'm going here, because kind of this idea would be, if this were this Baron is like, this is what the Baron, though obviously the level 1, level 2, right? They were kind of like, that's who he has generically. Then yes, the level 1 fighter could be a sub faction with their guys. Okay, the level 2 cleric is his own sub faction. It can get very complicated. Would there be counts in a duchy? I think a duchy is higher up the food chain than a county, so I think you might have multiple counties in a duchy. But it doesn't things were not that clean, who had what titles and whatnot. The point is that each person calls the people who have sworn fealty to them to do whatever, and then each person brings the people who swore fealty to them. So it's really like a multi-level marketing thing, but for armies. But for well, there you go. Google AI says yes. I'm glad we agree. Essentially, it's like a multi-level. It really is a pyramid scheme. It's exactly what it is. You swear fealty to me, then you get some people to swear fealty to you, and then if I make the call to arms or my liege makes the call to arms, then we all summon up. John says there are interesting implications, though. If you take out their magic using lieutenant, you know how many henchmen they were running that they've lost. Key players significantly strengthening or weakened. Yes, I mean, the complexities do add to that. If you get to a point in your game where you're playing the politics and things, and yes, this idea of the kind of retinue of retinues or sub factions, if you want to call it that, can absolutely come into play. Okay, Black Bart, one of these, because what I wanted to do with these is to name all these these leveled ones would get names, and they could be people that you would get to. Right. But I always have to keep in mind, at the end of the day, the purpose for this exercise is, hold on a second. Got something caught in my chair. The purpose is for your kind of starting campaign starter. So that stuff is great for when you're fleshing things out. And I would definitely encourage that, right? Make all these things, give all these things personality, give these different levels of people their own coats of arms and their colors, and so they can be found. They have their own needs and drives, and they can all be used against. But for your first bit, when you're just getting started, perhaps I would say most likely overkill. John says, to keep it from being overwhelming, you detail only the people in play. If the party is level 6, you probably don't care about the level 2 tier. They only matter from a mass combat perspective. Yeah, which is why I'm kind of keep it kind of simple. So I think what I would say about, like, to say the Baron is, I was going to make a couple things. So there's what would we call them? Not states. I don't know what we would call them. I don't want to use states because that's their. Trying to think. So what I was thinking about in scales is you can have a power that's. I got to think about it. Thinking, like one who's actually after, right, like a nation state, a kingdom, a barony, someone who's looking to control real estate. And then you might have something like a thieves guild that doesn't care about those kind of things, but cares about other things. And you could probably scale things for different ones so that if they are kind of a terrestrial, I don't know if that's even a good word. Whatever they are, if they're a kind of military, no, not military. If there's something where they're trying to gain land and amass that sort of thing, then you could maybe have some things where maybe I'll just put a general note, right? Depending on type, different configurations of personnel. So if you were, let's say and I'll have to think about what those would be. But basically, the idea would be that if you have a coven of witches, they may look very different than a barony. A coven of witches may have monsters in here, and they may have very few henchmen, but they're going to have more leveled monsters. Whereas a barony, maybe we need to increase his number, but maybe not, because I might not. Also, something to keep in mind, just for my context, is I try not to bloat up my fantasy medieval settlements and things. So I'm not doing with huge kingdoms and things. I think of things as being pretty small. So I think the average barony having that amount of men, that's probably a good number for basically a single, say, levy, which is probably what this would be, right? Because you don't remember a lot of these things, at least from movies, there's no standing armies. He has a few guys, maybe a someone who's not a castellan, but maybe somebody similar, a bailiff, a couple of dudes, and then he's calling his guys. So I think 3d6 in terms of like a levy or something he's getting from the local village or whatnot, and then even 3 level 1 fighters might even be enough, but maybe those are kind of squires and kids and, right, family. And then he's got his advisor who's the level 2 cleric, and maybe he's got the little vizier in the corner with a pointy hat on and a frayed magician's gown, and then he's the level 3 fighter. So that's why I'm thinking kind of small. My towns and cities are not water deep in these massive places and huge. It's small. I like to keep it pretty toned down. So that actually might be a reasonable size for that. But I mean, you might need to think about scaling things up. But in any case, yeah, part of the idea here is that the personnel, because this is not just because I'm not trying to do this just for the sake of doing it. Right? The leveled members become named antagonists. Spelling. Antagonists for use in the starter scenario. So the reason why I want to have some leveled members and maybe I want to name them. So we have the Baron. You're probably not going to be competing the Baron direct guys, and you can get to pick. You could pick. Okay, well, he's got 3 level 1 fighters. Who are they? What are they doing? Those are the guys who are probably going to show up with some number of the footmen potentially, or his levy or whatever, to as you're trying to clear out the mines, they're coming to try to enforce the Baron's ownership of the mines on very shaky legal ground, but they don't care because they're doing it with their swords and their fists rather than some kind of writ. They don't care. They're coming. So you're not going to maybe not going to meet the Baron, but you'll know the Baron. The Baron becomes somebody that will be maybe the opponent for a few adventures. But you're taking on this person, kind of thing. If that makes sense. And that person can be part of the main scenario. They could be, depending on the kind of scenario we're working here. And I'll probably have to get into what kind of scenarios you have. You could be going against them directly. This is the horror on the hill, keep on the borderlands, that sort of thing. Your antagonist, the lair. Remember, we talked about, I could zoom up here because I've got it. We talked about having the kind of the scheme, the factions, which we're going over, and then the scheme, what's going on. And then we talked about these locations, the refuge, the lair, and the adventuring location or kind of dungeon area. And we mentioned how the lair and the dungeon could be the same, or the refuge and the lair can be the same, or potentially the refuge and the dungeon can be, you can have all these, but there's a couple of different types of schemes, plots. Oops, maybe how does the faction relate to the scheme? So there's oops, I don't need this one. So you have kind of your race, a race type scenario, the party and the faction are in pursuit of a common goal. You can look at this if they don't really get into it too much. It's the very beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Indiana Jones is following the map, gets to the cave, goes in the cave, and all kinds of things happen. Comes out, and there's Belloc with all the locals and takes the golden idol away. In a sense, that was a race. Belloc, if we go to, well, let's just put one in there. No, come on, Ouija, help me out here. And actually, the Raiders of the Lost Ark has a couple of them. The whole Ark of the Covenant thing is also a race. Indiana Jones versus, I think that's how you spell his name, in the jungle. The adventuring location is the cave. The prize, golden idol. In a sense, the lair kind of, I almost put it in quotes, right, is the jungle itself. In a sense, is the lair. Jungle, indie races against Belloc to capture the idol and escape. Belloc catches up at the entrance and acquires the idol from Indy. So if we look at the example, Indiana Jones versus Belloc, right? The adventuring location is the cave. There's only traps, no monsters in there. Belloc is as the antagonist. Part of, I guess we call it the, if we look at the faction, we have faction 1 is Indy. Faction 2 is Belloc. He's not. I don't think he's involved with the Nazis at that point, so I'll leave the Nazis out of it. They're both going to a third location, so they are both trying to get to the same endpoint. If Belloc had gotten there first, he would have gone in with his allies and tried to do it. If, in a sense, this is the pattern for all the Indiana Jones movies. There's, gosh, I don't remember. I think Crystal Skulls is about the same. I think they all have the same pattern where they're both Indiana Jones, and I guess the one outlier would be Temple of Doom, maybe. But if you look at the ones that I can remember well, which are the older ones and not the newer ones, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, first and the Ark of the Covenant, there's this race aspect where Indy's either racing as Belloc or racing as Belloc and the Nazis to get to the thing. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of postscript when he has the thing taken away from him and then he has to get it back from them. But a good part of it is, okay, I'm racing them towards this thing. In this case, the thing they're looking for is the Golden Idol, and the eventual location kind of dungeon is a cave, which is kind of like a literal dungeon, and so on and so forth. So in that case, the reason why I go through this is the faction is the enemy, but they're not the dungeon denizens. The dungeon is either a third faction, or in the case of the Indiana Jones movies, usually it's something full of traps and mystery and puzzles, but it doesn't have actual any enemies in it. But that is one way that your faction can be, right? So that would be one. And we can also have direct opposition. Party is striking directly against the faction. Something like this would be your classic direct opposition example. Your direct opposition example, this would be your classic, basically you're pretty much where most adventure modules come in. Classic, keep on the Borderlands. Horror on the Hill. Ravenloft. Etc. Right? These are the ones where, okay, the party's goal is to go directly at a faction. And they're usually, in this case, the faction lair is often the adventuring location. Got to go take out the Goblin King, or the Goblin King's done something. We got to go. And it doesn't have to be that you'd have to there to defeat them. It could be you got to rescue. You got to go into the thing and rescue the lady, the man, the child, whatever, the item from the goblins. You're going to have to go to the goblins and you're going to have to get it. Or it could even be stealth. Oh, you have to sneak through these lands, these horrible lands with horrible creatures in it. You got to sneak through to get in there. The point is not necessarily that it doesn't have to be a combat kill everybody, but you're going up directly to it. You're not both heading to a third point. You're going at it. And of course you can reverse it also, where this would be your defensive. Oh my gosh, the orcs are attacking. We got to defend this or that, or do that. That can also be. You can kind of reverse it and do something like that, where the enemy is actually coming. The enemy is coming to you. But in any case, you're directly opposed as opposed to a race. There are probably more types. But I think that kind of covers it in terms of how, and like I said, the reason why we could probably do a whole thing just on that. But since we're talking about factions, talking about how factions relate, it's kind of hard to talk about how they relate without talking about, well, what is the actual thing that they're doing? And the other part is, the reason why I want more of these details is because I want to use this to get to the scheme, right? I want to, hold on a minute. Oh, Ouija, why are you? I want to generate the scheme from the faction. So we need to choose a goal. 1, choose a faction goal. 2, choose which personnel are tasked with completing this goal. 3, choose what steps they need to complete oh gosh, I know that the autocomplete is getting better with these things, but no, they need to succeed at to complete the goal. Then choose where are they in terms of progress when the party arrives, and then who of the other faction is opposing them and why. Why and how. So this is maybe kind of why I want this extra detail is not for nothing. And I feel like it's not, I don't feel like it's too much because we're only doing this twice. We're going to be putting in this extra detail. We're going to put this extra information out there, but we're only doing it 2 times because we're only having 2 factions. And we only need to break out one of their goals that we've picked for them and go a little bit deeper on there. And you could roll a die, pick a name out of a hat, whatever you want. If you feel like it's a harder thing, then maybe you put multiple things underneath there. So let's do an example. Let's do an example. So let's action scheme sample. All right, so we've got Baron Clodamar wants to, and what's to? Seeks to increase their estate by, I'll use quotes, arranging the death of a neighboring baron. Well, that's what he wants to do. There's our scheme. So Baron Clodamar seeks to increase their estate by arranging the death of a neighboring baron. That's basically this increased estate. So we're going after this increased estate goal. Now, oh, who is the baron setting on this particular task? We're going to say, okay, so we need to send some folks. Now, going off the idea that each one of these folks could in turn be their own little sub faction, retinue of retinues. Maybe he'll have some folks of his main house will go, but then this guy is going to, whoever they send is going to have their own folks. We can figure that out. This, to me, the way I'm thinking about it, I guess maybe we should figure out the steps first. So let's see. So we're going to get some steps. Let's get some steps. Let's get in our steps. One, lure the baron into a vulnerable place. Okay. Put the Baron. Oh, this is the, I guess we should say the, maybe I'll say neighbor so we don't confuse. Put the neighbor. So we have lured the neighbor to a dangerous, vulnerable spot. Put the neighbor into contact with some monsters. Ensure the neighbor dies at their hand. And then avenge their death. And then they put in a claim with the count for the neighbor's lands. And let's say this particular neighbor is vulnerable. The neighbor is vulnerable because they are a childless widower. So this particular, just in a bad spot. Doesn't have a new wife yet. Oh, but maybe let's add some more to this. The child's widower. However, a marriage is currently being arranged, so the window to strike is narrow and closing with every passing day. Okay, so there we have it. I think this is not a bad, especially if you're like a kind of like political, kind of a political game. I think this is not bad at all for a sort of a game that maybe for an intro into sort of a maybe a game that's going to be as much about influence and politics as it is about dungeon crawling. So you got this Baron wants to increase their estate by arranging the death of the neighboring Baron. The neighbor is vulnerable because they are a childless widower. However, a marriage is currently being arranged, I should say, for them. Oops. For them. So the window to strike is narrow and closing with every passing day. So our Baron Clodamar has seen this opening. Maybe the wife died in childbirth. And so not only have no child, there's no wife, Baron's alone, and at the moment, they figure that they can try to put this in action. And their plan, and it doesn't have to be a flawless plan. It just has to kind of pass the squinted eye test. Does it kind of make sense when you look at it from a fair distance? Okay. So we're going to lure the neighbor somewhere vulnerable, somewhere in the wild, thinking about a hunt. I think, this is probably someone could say, oh, this is what the Game of Thrones, what they did to the king, whatchamacallit, the beginning of Game of Thrones, where they kind of lured him out there and let the boar do his work, kind of thing. Let the boar, kind of similar, right? We're going to lure them out into the vulnerable place, maybe a hunt, right? On a hunt, perhaps. And then they're going to try to get some monsters in the same area. They got a magic user. I don't know. Magic user is, what level is he? Level 2. So maybe the magic user won't be able to, I don't know, have to say, or send out some messengers, send out something, just find some local monsters that are close by and get them. So you want to try to send somebody to get some monsters, pull them in, whatever those monsters are. Could be just monstrous animals, could be enemies, some kind of fae, whatever, or your orcs, goblins, whomever, some kind of enemy of the state, if you will. Then you're out hunting. Oh my gosh, owl bears attacked. Oh my gosh, it's ghouls. Whatever it is, it's a demon of the ancient world. Whatever. The neighbor goes down because they just so happen. It's just some bad luck, really horrible timing. How they heard the bugle call. Oh, we found the fox or whatever they're hunting, and oh my gosh, there happened to be an army of ghouls was right there. Neighbor goes down. Of course, you go in to save them. You avenge their death, and now you have this land who now suddenly doesn't have anybody. And look, hey, didn't I just put my life at risk to keep the land safe? I tried everything I could for the Baron, for my neighbor Baron, and what a pitiful thing. But hey, I his lands are next to mine. There's really nobody else. And didn't I just do such a good deed? And maybe I've got some flex in the court of the count, so they'd be willing to look an eye away, or maybe I'll slide them some extra coin. And hey, we're going to make this. Heck, maybe I've made those arrangements already. Maybe I've already talked to the count and said, listen, this, that, and the other, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'm going to take that. You might not have the people to stop me. I've kind of beefed up a little bit. I'm going to take it, but I'll give you some extra. However it works, you've done that. Seems like a fait accompli. Of course, as we're going to see, well, there's a party of players that might get involved. Now, given maybe the party will want to get in on the action. Dungeon Master Masterclass says, how about the count gets some land and I get some land? I mean, you could. I mean, part of the thing with the whole fealty system is that these bigger people can't control that land. Right. This is going to depend a little bit on how fantastic your things are. But part of the whole reason that these kinds of feudal systems came into being was the fact that you had people that were too far away to be able to manage, and without the personnel. So you go from something like the Roman Empire that had a bureaucracy and really was a state that could manage all the stuff, and that collapses. And then you get these people, and it's like, well, I'm in Paris and stuff's going on way over there. I can't get way over there, or wherever they are, Cologne, Rouen, I don't know, wherever the seat pick your favorite seat of power. I can't get over there. I can't even get word of what's going on over there. It takes days. And by the time I know, that's happened. And plus, I don't have the personnel to do things like collect taxes and do all that. So part of the whole feudal network is about a little bit of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge of somebody saying, listen, I can't control it. I can't. But what I can do is, for our mutual benefit, you're going to help me, and we're going to kind of keep the system itself humming along. And since I can't control it, but you're Johnny on the spot, you can. You're gonna. It's that kind of mob thing. I'm gonna kick up some to you, and you keep some and kick up some. So the count could take some land on their own, but there's a good chance that the count doesn't have the people to do it, because that's why they have barons to do it. He could. Though maybe if that could be another actually Dungeon Master Masterclass, yes, he could gift it to somebody else, but that would almost be a reason where there could be a double cross thing, right? Depending on how the scenario plays out, maybe our Baron Clodomar here doesn't have things as laid out, and instead of increasing their land, maybe the Lord gives it to somebody else. There are many wrinkles. Heck, maybe the party intercedes at some vector, and the party gets the land instead, right? So there are many ways you can work it out. But we're just talking about what the Baron wants. So we don't really need to even go through all the different permutations. That all will come out in the dynamism of play. Really, we just want to know that, okay, this is the Baron's plan. And I think it's an okay plan. Not foolproof. Nothing's foolproof. A lot of ways it could go wrong, but he's going to try to put his thumb on the scales as much as possible. So the personnel the Baron's going to send, I think we need the magic user. Oops. The level 2 magic user. Let's see, maybe the level 1 fighter. And 1d6. I'll just call it 6. I'm going to, 6 footman. I'll just call it 6 footman. There we go. And of course, the the leveled NPCs can have their own retinues. So now when we're developing this scenario, we'll have to figure out the monster. We can roll some dice. We can look at something like, oh, what do we got in Men? What do we got? Since I just was looking at Underworld and Wilderness, we can look at what we have in here. We can figure out what monster it is. But now we're starting to put the kind of the flesh on the bones of the scenario. Next thing we have to figure out is, well, what faction do we have that can oppose this? Because right now we've only built one faction. So it's been an hour. We're kind of over the limit. I got other things I have to do. So I'll probably have to kind of continue this, but I like where we're going. I like this faction scheme. We're gonna need to, our homework is to think about, well, who can be the opposing faction? We have the thing is that I like about this stuff is because when you guys start getting into it, things reveal themselves. We got the neighboring baron, who might be a faction. They're just not a. They're in this point. They're playing the role of the victim, but they could be the fact. This could be this faction striking against the next faction, right? It could be that. That makes the most sense. That hey, the neighboring faction is the faction in this scenario is antagonistic. Definitely the one who's directly antagonistic is the neighbor. Absolutely. You've also got the potential, if we want to, is the count. And remember, the aim of this isn't just a single adventure. It's kind of like this is the adventure that's your campaign starting adventure. So this is hopefully going to just start you're priming the pump, right? We're priming the pump, getting things going, and then things will take over. So the count will also be a faction. These are all factions that we'd want to develop at some point. Which one is the one that is most going to be involved? This probably the Baron. So we would probably want, okay, so maybe the next thing we'll do is think of, okay, who is this neighboring Baron? What do they want? And obviously they oppose this because they don't want to die. So there definitely is a reason for opposing it. Maybe we'll have to look at, well, are they aware of this threat or not? Are they just aware of threats generally? Are they just wary? Some people are just clever and they're like, maybe the whole angle of the party, this whole adventure could be, okay, I'm been invited to go on this hunt. I don't like it, but I can't refuse. I think I need some extra hands. So, hey, party members, hey, you guys just walked into town. I need some extra muscle. I want you to be my extra muscle, and come with me on this hunt. And then we have kind of you pretty much have the bones of the adventure. But we're going to put a pin in it now. So put our pin, drop your pin in it now. We will return. Hopefully this is an interesting, useful exercise. I think it's been useful for me. I think it's useful to think about, and I'm thinking about things. We have some unknowns, and part of it is I don't necessarily want to or need to fill in everything, like what Mouse Ritter did. Right here, I'm going to give you some examples. Here's how I fill it in. But I do also appreciate sometimes when you can kind of, especially when you're starting something new, you can kind of follow and say, okay, these are the kind of the guidelines. So I am trying to think about how do we build this out? What kind of guidelines can I give that are going to be useful, but not super vague to the point of being meaningless, but not trying to entrap you in anything. Just give you some rough guidelines you can build off of. And I think building this out is helping me. So hopefully it's helping you. I shall return. Thanks everyone who hung out. Thanks for if you have a great rest of your day. If you're watch or listen to this later, then have a great rest of whenever that is. Other than that, folks, game on, and I'll talk to you later. Bye now.